Hello, Zimbabwe. Thank you for joining us on Neander TV. I have a fascinating debate today. We're going to be looking at polarization in Zim politics. So I've decided to interview, or rather host a debate featuring two people from opposing streams, as it were, MDC UK and Zanu PF UK. So we've decided to extend an invitation to some interesting characters from both parties, people that we think are lively and, will make this an interesting debate. So, okay, let me get my bearings right. Farai Muvuti, Zanu PF UK, is to your left, and Chenayi Mutambasere, MDC UK, is to your right as you're watching. How are you guys?
We're doing good, Lance.
I'm doing great, Lance. Thanks for having me.
Okay, so let's start with you, Farai. Who are you and what do you do?
Thank you, Lance. My name is Farai Muvuti. I represent the Youth League of Zanu PF in the UK and Europe, and I am the chairperson of the Youth League in the UK and Europe.
Okay, and Chenayi.
Hi, Lance. I'm Chenayi. I am the MDC Portfolio Secretary for Industry and Commerce, actively participating in everything Zimbabwe. So, yeah.
Okay.
Glad to be here.
All right, so the topic is polarization in Zim politics. So we're trying to find out what is behind the vile debates, the vile language, whether it's on Twitter or Facebook. What is it about the political culture in our country that sees people throw such harsh language at each other? Ladies first, I suppose. Chenayi.
Okay, so I think there's two sides to the coin. Having been at the receiving end of some of the harsh comments myself, I'll start with the first side, which is the side that is really seeking to oppress alternative views, seeking to oppress the voice of every Zimbabwean. And we see that in many forms in Zimbabwe, sadly. Then we also have the other side, and I like to call this the human side. And this is the side that just says, what the hell? Why is this happening to me? I am Zimbabwean, proudly so. I am a young person. I should be working. I should be at a different place in my life. But this is happening. Why is it happening? And that does, have some frustrations that can present in what you would call vile or harsh comments, particularly to those people that we feel, or the people that are using that language feel, that are taking away these freedoms from them.
Okay. Get you to respond to that, Farai. What do you make of what Chenayi is saying?
Firstly, thank you for having me. Of course, I differ with the way the narrative has been framed on Chenayi's part, because it's sort of looks at it from a very binary perspective, where it's an oppressor and the oppressed. It really doesn't, which oversimplifies the narrative, the issue at hand. I think when you look at intolerance in itself, it means that there is a culture of not being accommodative. It's a lack of accommodation. So we then have to look at our society as a developing and emerging and a young democracy, as the journey that we have come to so far, and what has defined the present. But to understand the present, one must understand the past. So there is a history of tension. There is a history of coloniality. There is a history of emergence, and Zimbabwe is not shaped by one history. It's shaped by multiple histories.
Do you not feel a measure of responsibility being the ruling party? You are the party that has been in power since independence. So you've helped to shape this culture, have you not?
Well, responsibility, sure. But what are we taking responsibility for? This is a critical question. And this is why I understand that I think it was Kwame Nkrumah, if I'm not mistaken, who talked about how it is easier to liberate a nation than to shape one. Okay, so naturally, and Zanu PF, like many other countries, is not isolated in its history in terms of how it intends to develop and shape a country. If you look at the history of even just the UK itself, from the dominance of the Conservative Party for the longest of time, from the history of the Tories, and how when it came to the emergence of Labour, that you found that they were issues of polarity. Europe in its political dispensations in an evolving sense, equally face the same. So it's about how we look at the story. And I think where we then shatter the issue and oversimplify it is by making it seem as if there's a question between the oppressor and the oppressed. Because the honest truth is there is no oppressor and there is no oppressed.
Okay, there is no oppressor. Chenayi, do you agree with that?
Lance, I have to say, just to remark my learned colleague, that was a very lengthy explanation to a simple problem. But from what I could catch of what he said, of course there is an oppressor and they are the oppressed. I think to try and shy away from that in itself is a fraud. You know, we have, because you see, it's not a matter of opinion, it's a matter of fact that currently we have a whole generation who have had their freedoms taken away. And by that, I mean, they should be financially independent, making good financial decisions for themselves and for the people that depend on them. And they're not able to do that. And there's a reason why that is. And we have a Zimbabwe that does not allow everybody to flourish. So you could literally do everything right. You could go to school, achieve good grades. Your parents could put you in the best school they can afford. You could then move on, go to college, go to university, do every training that you possibly could, and get to the end of it, and there's nothing for you. And we are stuck in this time capsule now for decades, right? And when you look at Zimbabwe, we are not that different to neighboring South Africa in terms of potential, from what we can get in terms of our natural resources, from what we can get out of production and so on. But these are things that have been taken away in oppressive fashion. Why is it oppressive? It is because I have not, as an independent Zimbabwean, I have not been given the opportunity to access those opportunities. That has been taken away from me. And then I can look on at a different sect, very small sect of the economy that seem to be flourishing.
Okay, I have a question here.
Means.
Quick question for Farai. I'm displaying the question here. It's come from YouTube. The questions come from YouTube. Someone says, how anyone can support Zanu PF is beyond me, especially when they are in the diaspora. You want to answer that?
No, that's really their comment. I rather not dwell on that. But what I'm really interested in is really tackling the question that.
No. I mean, it's a fair question to ask. You are in the diaspora.
I agree. All things being fair, but you also came up with when you asked the question, you also said, "Do I want to answer it?" And I said, "I rather not dwell on that because it's their disposition. There is nothing I can say to them that will make them understand."
But you could attempt an answer and explain why, even if you are in the diaspora, like many who fled, how you are able to support. I mean, it's a fair question. You could give an objective answer.
Okay. So what we'll do, what I want. So let me address that question. But firstly, I want to quickly respond to what Chenayi said, because I think it would be unbecoming in terms of journalistic protocol for me not to address that as one representing the institution that is pitted against these fallacies that she's just presented, or what I call intellectual dishonesty, if anything. Now, so she dwells around the argument of flourishing and saying that people have been denied the ability to flourish. Now, when we look at this,
sorry, maybe I missed what you said. You are answering the question about being in the diaspora and supporting Zanu PF.
I'm going to address that.
Okay.
But first, I'm going to go on to Chenayi.
Okay.
So I want to first respond to this argument of flourishing, that because people have been denied the ability to, as she suggests, the ability to make decisions. As she said, she even used the example of South Africa.
Mm-hmm.
South Africa has a Gini coefficient that's almost embarrassing. When it comes to inequality questions, you may know, and you don't even need to listen to me, simply look at global reports around the income inequality aspect and access to opportunities in South Africa. You'd quickly find that there are issues there, right? But we then don't say that people are oppressed as a consequence of no access to the ability to flourish, as you just rightfully said. It's a regional problem and an equally a continental problem defined and coined by our stage of development. So how we approach the issue also enables us to understand how one conceptualizes and diagnoses what the outcomes are. And I think her premise is faulty to begin with. Now, let me address the issue of the diaspora, for instance, and how I can exist within the diaspora. Now, I come from a family that contributed to the liberation struggle. And part of the underpinning issues that these people went to war was not the right to dignity and to the right to ownership, be it land and be it whatever the case may be. It is the right to self-define individualism. So I may not exist in Zimbabwe the same way that Britain has a large number of expatriates that exist in Germany, that exist in Australia, that exist in all parts of Africa. And that question is never asked. Why? Because they understand that they have a right to individualism. Now, I may not, but remember, just because I am not in Zimbabwe does not seize my quest and my desire to find a Zimbabwe that is equally as successful as all the places I've been in the world. This is why I say that the question is faulty, because it looks at things obscurely. It doesn't look at the broader picture.
So which question is faulty here? Which question is faulty here?
The faulty questions, well, of course, Chenayi's faulty. Chenayi's question is also faulty, but hers was not a question. Hers was an argument. The question that was asked here was about the diaspora.
Mm-hmm.
And let me my final point on the diaspora aspect is that 60% of the GDP of Israel is contributed by a diasporian base. Ghana understands the security bases and the opportunities that can be built from its Africa diaspora. AU itself has a policy predicated against leveraging its diaspora community. So we need to think globally. We need to think internationally. And to ask a question about a Zimbabwean who supports a party, by the way, that is a ruling party, my aspirations are not different to Chenayi's aspirations. I simply belong to a different ideology, a school of thought. But I would like to believe that our desires for Zimbabwe are similar. And that's why we have it.
All right, let me throw in Chenayi there. You've heard his answer to both the topic that we're discussing and the one that he was asked via YouTube by I think it's Boss or Jacob. What's your response, Chenayi?
So my response to Farai in the first instance is, Zanu PF are typical of long-winded gobbledygook, and they want to blind you with science. So what we're talking about here is a simple problem, right? We will not throw too much at it. I know you've talked about the Gini coefficient and income inequality in South Africa. In Zimbabwe, we can't even begin to go there. We are missing a whole middle class, right? So if we can just park that argument for now, what I'm talking about is that in Zimbabwe, we have generations that have been robbed of access to opportunity. And to answer the question from the viewer, you are here in the diaspora because you are part of that generation that has been robbed of that access to opportunity, right? Now, we can go on about we get a remittance from the diaspora, and that's okay. But here you are, Farai, here we are, you and I, you with your blinding science and your academic speak. How much more would our nation, as you claim to be patriotic, benefit if we were to actually be investing these skills back in Zimbabwe? Now, we are here because we do not have that access to opportunity. That's why we're here. Now, you can choose to word it in 100 words, or you can just keep it simple and say, I am literally here because I need access to economic opportunity.
Okay,
I need
let me
access
interrupt
to a
you,
better
Chenayi,
well-being.
and take you guys back to our original question, which is the polarity or the polarization in our politics. Would you deny, Chenayi? I'll just ask you a direct question. It cuts both ways. There is a lot of vile language that does come from opposition ranks. Does it not? Do you see it as one-sided, or both parties contribute to the culture of vile debates that we have?
Okay, so as I've said, there are two sides to this coin.
Mm-hmm.
There is the presentation that is born out of frustration, and the volume of that is getting louder and louder, because it's ridiculous, the things that we as Zimbabweans are expected to accept and to live with. We are having our rights taken away on a daily basis. We are waking up to a Zimbabwe that is far worse off than what we went to bed with last night. So frustration, it must come out. We must be able to vent, and social media does actually provide some sort of a safe space to do that. Because if I was to go into Zimbabwe right now and stand in the middle of First Street or wherever, as we've seen in the past, and try to express my frustrations, chances are I'm probably going to spend that night, and that's if I'm lucky, in remand. If I'm not lucky, I might not even make it through that night to begin with. So the idea that, yes, I would agree that we have a language that is born out of independent frustration by individuals wanting to vent, wanting to say, what the hell, I've had enough of this nonsense, right? Now, how eloquently that is put comes down to the individual, and maybe how badly they're feeling in that moment.
Okay, quick question. Sorry to interrupt.
We also have an alternative citizen, and that citizen is actually trying to oppress and to silence that voice that says, I've had enough. I can't put up with this anymore.
Okay,
and that language, and I myself, I have been on the attack side of that language. It's awful, and it's vile, and it's unbecoming, and at times inhumane.
Farai, could I ask you to move to your left a bit? Just to center you, just to center you on the screen. Okay,
I can't see you, Lance, by the way. You've gone off screen.
Is it? All right. Hopefully you will be able to catch me later. Okay, I'm displaying this question for Peter Mupondi. Farai Muvuti, when did you last visit Zimbabwe? Don't you have any regrets over how the economy is run in Zimbabwe? That's from Peter Mupondi for Farai.
Thank you. Thank you, Peter, for your question. I visit Zimbabwe very frequently. I think the last time is late last year. And in terms of the question about don't you have any regrets over how the economy is run in Zimbabwe, I think it'll be disingenuous of me to say that having been in politics for so long as a party, that there are no regrets. And those regrets are defined and espoused by our coining of the new dispensation term. But it clearly, by that very definition, there's an intent to reform, an intent to pursue a better and more solidified agenda that sees our country heading towards what we've now what we are currently pursuing, which is called Vision 2030, which aims to see us at an upper middle income by 2030. And the strategy is in place. Of course, there are challenges in light of the many factors that you may know, which are tied to an international embargo. The rain seasons, as you well know, has not, as an agroeconomy, has not had very favorable outcomes for us. But there is political will, and there are strategies in place that aim to change.
Let me ask you a quick question. I mean, we've got some interesting comments that are coming, and I think maybe we can slide them in because they kind of speak to the topic that we are discussing. So this is, let me display this. This is Sylvester Mangono. He says, it's just shocking that someone who considers themselves sane to support and belong to Zanu PF. So already wakutokandirwa mashoko ka Farai.
And I suppose,
But do you understand why that happens? I suppose this is what we're discussing.
Well, I think, of course, I think that's part of the reasons why I took this particular debate is because it really helps us understand, it helps us unpack these particular issues, where we can get our country to a point in which we distinguish between the political and what is political. Okay, so when you talk about the political, you're talking about the issues of the day, and when you talk about what is the political are the issues of the day. Politics is then it then becomes a question of what you're for and what you're against. What we tend to have a problem within our society is not having an intrinsic conversation, a depth-focused conversation about the political, the issues. Okay, so it then becomes a good-sounding chorus of platitudes that are not really consecrated in substance. So, for instance, Chenayi earlier was talking about how the economy, Farai, you left the country and so forth, right? But in that, she refutes the fact that she belongs to a labor movement that supports sanctions that reduce jobs, even those jobs that are taken directly from the public service, for example. Government is the highest employer. So when you sanction a government entity, 30,000 people lose their jobs, but yet you are a labor movement and you stand for this. So she does not even see the oxymoronic aspect of what she even supports.
Okay,
So
let's get her to respond. I see he's Nicodemously, he's Nicodemously putting the sanctions debate there. Or I wanted to use the word smuggle. He smuggled the sanctions debate into a debate on polarization. But anyway, there you go.
You know what, Farai? Thank you actually for bringing that very important subject up. So it is fallacious to imply that sanctions are brought by a party based in Zimbabwe.
Lobby.
A Zimbabwean-based party cannot possibly tell Trump what to do, right? Trump is voted in by his electorate, and they have an expectation on him. They do not expect that he will be seen to support a government that oppresses its own citizens, a government that abducts its own citizens, a government that withholds human rights from its own citizens, right? So he appeases his electorate, not the MDC. And equally so, of the UK government. They are there to appease their electorate. They're not there. Notwithstanding the fact that I'm in the UK, I wouldn't particularly, in fact, I would probably wouldn't vote for Boris Johnson, right? So Boris Johnson appeases his electorate, he appeases his voters, and there's absolutely no way that a British public would support the financial and otherwise support of a government that is openly seen to withhold human rights from its own citizens, that is openly seen in an alleged aspect to abduct its citizens, a government that is not seen to promote any sort of human rights freedom on its own citizens.
Can I throw this to Farai and say we're discussing polarization, and historically we've had a lot of political violence in Zimbabwe. We've had state-sponsored abductions, and this has been a culture right from 1980 when we had my youth brigade and stuff. Do you accept the contribution your party has made to this culture of violence? Because those who put the sanctions put them there for a reason, and they even gave parameters that if this is met, those sanctions will be removed. So Zanu PF knows what it has to do to have the sanctions removed. But I'm trying to tie in debate trade with to stick to our debate. Do you acknowledge the contribution of violence to counter here?
I'm in favor of this discussion in terms of how you want to frame it and tie it into a more sort of accommodative tone that enables us to have a proper in-depth discussion. This is partly why I'm here. Now, let's just firstly, before I come to your question, Lance, I think do favor me with just a little bit of time to address some of the, what I'd like to say, the rally speech that was given by Chenayi, because that was nothing of a debate. She challenged nothing substantively. She simply gave, a monologue of the common sort of narratives we tend to hear from the MDC. All we needed to do was simply read Chamisa's transcript, and she would have kept quiet and we'll be fine. But anyway, let me address what she said. Now, she points to this narrative of sanctions and so forth as Trump gets in. No, firstly, we need to do history well. We need to understand that these sanctions were introduced right in 2000. And when you read the initial sanctions that were introduced, when the human rights abuses that are mentioned are not specific, by the way, the critical thing to always remember is that these sanctions were unilateral, which betrays the Vienna Treaty and Geneva treaties, right? But let's put that aside.
Have you addressed why they were put? Why were the sanctions put?
I have the floor.
Okay.
The floor. We're not going anywhere. We're not going. I have the floor.
All right.
I'm not going anywhere. I'm not in a hurry.
Okay.
So that's why we call them illegal, because they don't meet the international standards, right, of imposing a sanction, as was the case in 1990 with Iraq, right? But let's put that aside. Let's now look at the detail of what these sanctions then do. What they create, right? They don't put these sanctions so that it establishes a fashion, right, or so somewhat of a trend. The MDC on.
Are we going off script?
No, I'm approaching this. I said I'm going to answer your question first. So let's listen to each other. Let's be accommodative, as I was accommodative to your comment. Anyway, the MDC is on record, and one simply needs to look at the WikiLeaks reports that came out of the Dell reports and so forth. They lobbied. I did not say they called for the sanctions. They lobbied. Which is if now whether America then decides, the mere fact that a citizen of a country, a opposition leader in a country and his team lobbied for a sanctioning of a country. Now let's say I agree with the argument that sanctions have no impact. Okay, the mere tagline, and thank God Chenayi used to work in a bank, so she would know the tagline of a sanction on a country has an impact on its debt ability, equally has an impact on its ability to borrow, which has an impact on its ability to develop and create product.
Could I ask you, sorry to interrupt you, just a quick question. Just a quick question there.
No, you've asked two questions.
So you want to focus on those who have called for the sanctions and ignore the ones that have created the environment that has invited the sanctions.
I'm sure, Lance, if we are to be fair, you asked a question. I said to you that I will respond to Chenayi and I will answer your question. I do not fear your question. I simply want to answer the question that was laid before the debate that was laid before me. And you as chair, you should have followed that.
No. We are approaching 30 minutes. Then she's got 10 minutes, and then it becomes like we need that back and forth.
Let me come back to you. Now, coming to your point, yes, you're right. Zanu PF, when we talk about polarization, the MDC is not in bed alone when it comes to the political landscape that forges our country. We are there too, right? We are there too, right? And both political parties have to take responsibility of their own actions, right? We as Zanu PF have taken responsibility by having an internal reform agenda, forging that reform agenda. For instance, let's look at the current incidents that happened recently. In Bulawayo, we had the Mpofu sisters that were brutalized by the police. 6 police officers immediately were arrested. Well, not immediately, but after the reports were made and there was lobbying done, there was an action there, right? 6 police officers to that effect were arrested. This is a government that has the intent to ensure that its agenda of reform is followed through. What I
noticed you dodged the Joanna Mamombe, Cecilia Chembiri, and you rushed to talk about.
I did not dodge. Listen, no one is dodging.
How are we doing for time?
Okay, so sorry. Let me just quickly bring in Chenayi so that you've heard what Farai is saying. What do you make of that?
I've heard all of what Farai is saying, some of which wasn't even particularly asked, but we'll take it. I've also heard his sort of sly personal attack So noted once again. But which I think will probably provide evidence to your initial question, Lance. But that aside,
No, that was what.
From what Farai is saying,
Mm-hmm.
right, to add more rhetoric, because that is what it is. That is the Zanu PF rhetoric mantra that says it tries to sell off the idea that good old perfect Zanu PF was doing really well and reforming, and then suddenly somebody went somewhere and tried and convinced whole governments to implement sanctions on Zimbabwe. With the idea of rhetorical statements, I will pose this question to you, Farai. Are you actually aware of what the conditions aligned to the sanctions are?
Yes, I am.
Okay. So from that premise, you will understand that continued torture, like you've given an example, and I'm happy to stick to that example of the sisters that were brutalized terribly so by our own Zimbabwe Republic police. Now, great, you put the police in jail or whatever, they were eventually arrested. But how is this happening in modern day Zimbabwe? How is this happening in 40 years from independence? And why is it being allowed to happen? Because it was allowed to happen. And this was enacted by a public office, right? Now, on the issue of corruption, because you did highlight about being blacklisted, about that you won't have investors because you have sanctions. That is not true. Zimbabwe, in its state of Rhodesia, had actually some of the worst sanctions, right?
Okay.
Levied on any country, right? We have other countries like Israel also having sanctions, right? Now,
Israel has sanctions? Where? Sorry?
Well, you need to, sorry, not Israel, but yeah. We have other countries that have got sanctions levied upon them. Yeah,
okay, let me bring you guys back. We've drifted from our topic of discussion, but here's the thing. I know I'm talking to someone from Zanu PF UK, MDC UK, but you are both Zimbabweans. So I want to ask you a question. What's holding us back? Why are we where we are? I'll start with you, Farai. I mean, there's not much that separates you in terms of your hopes for the future. You and Chenayi want a better Zimbabwe. Saka, what's the problem? Farai, let's start with you.
I think so.
You've drifted off the screen. If you could go to the.
Is that okay?
If you go to your left a bit. Okay.
Is that all right?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Now, firstly, let me start by saying, if Chenayi felt like it was when I said that she mentioned a monologue and she was giving a Chamisa speech at a rally, and she felt that was a personal attack, I would like to personally apologize, because that was just it was banter. I didn't see it as a personal attack. I saw it as natural, jovial debate banter. But nevertheless, let me get to why I feel what's holding us back. The kind of debate we're having now actually typifies the kind of discussions we should be having. It's civil. We're listening to each other and we're engaging, and no one has said an insult. We've not held insults at each other or have brought in our mothers and the generations there before. We've simply discussed issues as we differ. What is difficult is that when we, you see, I have a different political philosophy. I stand by different political ideologies, but I'm still Zimbabwean. Chenayi stands by different political ideations and philosophies, but she's still Zimbabwean. And what we're doing now is engaging, right, in these different, and we're having an argument around what we think is the best way forward. Now, that doesn't make us enemies. After this interview, I'm sure we're going to have banter again, right? Now, what holds us back is the intolerant aspect of it. And earlier I defined what is that intolerance. It is the failure to be accommodative of a different ideation, right? That just not tolerating. Hearing someone else's argument.
I can't even remember the question that you.
But the problem with that answer is your party is the one that's in power. So if you are president and you have a ruling party, the onus is on you to run the country properly.
Being in power. Okay, so I'll give you an example, a practical example. Being in power does not then become a prerequisite to then imposing a culture of tolerance. No, that doesn't mean that. Even if you go to America, for instance, Trump is in power, but there's a high level of polarity in America. In fact, when you look at the current situation in America, at the backdrop of George Floyd, it evidences the intense divide, racial divide, political divide on issues around what I called earlier the political. Right? We are not inept from that. We are not separate from that. Zimbabwe does not exist in a vacuum. We should always look at how many countries have emerged in its development journey. Zimbabwe is a young democracy that is equally finding its feet, same as America, which America, having existed for over 250 years, is too trying to find its feet. Now, we are not separate from that. However, we have the advantage of looking at the world through the lens of history, which is the greatest laboratory for us, so that we can build. And I think it's equally up to political leadership. If you look at what's happening in the MDC alone, you don't even need to take my words. Take the words of Douglas Monzora. Take the words of Thokozani Kupe, who was almost burnt in her heart, for Christ's sake. It breeds into this political polarity. And what does Zanu PF have to do with the MDC, whether it fails internally or wins internally? But yet here you find an MDC taking a woman, right, and putting her in her heart and being willing.
Lance.
Okay. Let me give Chenayi the chance to respond.
It's across the political divide. We have to deal with.
Farai, sorry, May.
All right, Farai, just hold on. Let Chenayi answer you there. Okay.
One of script.
My final point.
Respectfully.
My final
no,
point.
No, we will not make the final point.
Coulthard put it rightly in his book. Zimbabwe has to, and I don't support Coulthard, but he does make a critical point. Zimbabwe has to look at the violence index historically. So it's not a Zanu PF job alone. It's a collective job.
Okay, so can I, Farai, that's a very loaded statement, perhaps more agenda-driven than actually being able to answer Lance's question, but, we'll let that slip because we're tolerant. So to come back to the issue of sanctions that you mentioned before, and I highlighted to you, and you were very surprised, actually, when I say to you, Israel, it does have sanctions, and you questioned that. Now, it does actually have sanctions. It's been condemned by the United Nations. But what I will tell you, is that, can I just finish? If I can just finish, you will see that even up to 2017, the unemployment rate was 4.22%. Investors are not bothered about sanctions. Investors come where it's a reasonable place to invest. And Zanu PF has failed by all accounts to create an environment that is inducive for investors. And as long as investors will be put off by the lack of a judicial system that upholds the law, I don't know, if I invest my millions in Zimbabwe, there is a high risk that actually Zanu PF can turn around and say, well, we need to shut you down. And we're going to give your company to some other small outfit out there that wants to thrive or whatever. And they will do that. And this is why investors will not come to Zimbabwe. And as long as investors will not come to Zimbabwe, we will not get an improvement in access to opportunity, to stick to the point. And for as long as that is happening, we have a frustrated citizen that is being created by the animal that is Zanu PF. Zanu PF creates frustration because they are failing to create an economy that is inducive to investment, that is just inducive to just living. There's no health care. There's no health care. We have one of the worst corruption indices in the world, right? And that is why the country is failing to thrive. And by so doing, that is why we're all frustrated. And that frustration is born out of Zanu PF's inadequacies. So
here's a question for
sugar-coated any way you like.
All right, sorry to interrupt you, Chenayi. Let me ask Farai a question. I've asked Farai this question during our many discussions here and there. Your age, generation yako Farai, I think when we started this debate, I'm sure a lot of people picked on that. Kuti, here's a young guy, he's in the diaspora. In terms of generation, I would like to think, I'm just guesstimating, but the majority of youths will not really be for Zanu PF. If we were to look at my demographics and how people are voting, traditionally Zanu PF gets its support from my rural areas, mainly the elderly. So when people look at a young boy like you, I think I support Zanu PF, they want to find out your motivation. Is it a search for opportunity? Is it you wanting to be the next Nick Mangwana? What is it?
You know, I tend to I'm shattered by at times how the simplistic approach to your line of questioning sometimes. You know, I tend to forget that you are the Lance Guma. I tend to discuss it sometimes because of how simple you approach things. But before I address your question, I have to, of course, rightfully so, you know, really push back at what Chenayi said. She made some good points around what she pointed out to be, you know, and she used Israel, which is really laughable if she looks at what she's actually talking about. Because, you know, if you cite that the UN, for instance, has told someone off, and then you cite that as a sanction, it's folly. I mean, one simply needs to look at how much the US is currently invests in Israel itself, state to state.
All right, Taenda Israel, US, can we go back to Zim a bit? I asked the question, a young person like you, what's the attraction to Zanu PF?
Lance, 2 points. Firstly, you're not going to call me here to represent my organization and allow someone to speak fault lines that are incorrect and let me then just go on to your question.
Can you just before you do that, Farai, could you stick to the case in point? We're not opening a case study on Israel.
All right, sorry. Hold on. We're discussing polarization in Zim politics. Anditika, I asked the question about your attraction as a young man, generation Zanu PF. So for the debate to be about Israel, United Nations, yes. I think people who are watching are not interested in that. So yeah. No, that's fine. Okay, sorry. Can I just ask a direct question? Direct question. Sorry, hold on. No, sorry. I'm not having this. I asked you a direct question. As a young boy, Farai, generation Yako, not many your age support Zanu PF. It's a direct question. What is that? Sorry, hold on. Let me frame my question. What is... No, sorry. Sorry. Hold on, Farai.
Beholden to you.
Chimbomira Farai. You see, you are dodging the question. Okay, sorry.
Pure protocol. Journalistic protocol should suggest to you that when my organization is attacked, I have a right to respond. Now, are you saying to me you are denying me the right to respond?
Sorry. Okay. Can we press the reset button? Can we press the reset button? Muri too. And I'm occasionally fielding. Okay, sorry.
We're not pressing reset button.
Sorry. Sorry. You see,
it's not your show.
Generally, when you have someone doing this, I will try to avoid the answer. So I'll re-ask my question again. That's Farai. No, Farai. Sorry.
Okay.
Sorry.
How about we meet each other halfway?
No. I just asked a simple question and Ruda answer. So the simple question is, sorry Farai. It's not gonna work if you do this. A young person like you. It's a fair question. A young person like you, generationally, not many your age, support Zanu. Sorry, why are you interrupting the question? Let me ask the question so that generationally is normally the elder who supporter. Saga you urum diaspora urum fana wechidiki. What is the attraction to Zanu PF? It's a simple question.
Listen, okay. I'm going to answer the question, but I'm saying to you that, and this is what I said before. I'm simply repeating myself here. You are making.
Please don't. Just answer the question.
Listen to Chenayi.
You said you're repeating. You don't have to.
Is this okay? Listen. At the end of the day, here's the point I'm making. I'm going to address Chenayi's question, and I'm going to answer your question. That's how I'm going to do it. Now, firstly, the Chenayi's question was around the line of sanctioning. Now, we have to refute this issue because it has to be looked at against the historical backdrop. The sanctions, and so to conclude the point against Chenayi, I'll simply request your listeners to Google a man called Jesse Helms and see the partnership that he had with Ian Smith, and then we are able to debunk the theory that Ian Smith had sanctions and was able to thrive. That's one. Two.
Can I make a suggestion, Lance?
Lance? Now, let Farai finish. Let him finish his point.
If you want to have a discussion by yourself, Chenayi, go ahead. Yeah, I have other things to do. But if I'm going to be platform, I'm going to be allowed to speak freely. Right now, so we want to deal with that issue. Then, secondly, we find this Jesse Helms character within the issue of sanctions in 2000 and in 2000 again. So Chenayi needs to do a research around the histories that make the sanctions exist. It is not purely human rights. It is not purely what you're saying. That's
Farai. Lance, I'm really sorry. All
people need
to interrupt.
Let's go back.
If we are having a debate
now,
on sanctions.
To your question, why I am a young man based in the UK supporting Zanu PF. Now, I would like to say this is a good question because it addresses the very issues we're currently discussing. Political polarization comes from the non-acceptance of someone else's right to associate. Now,
sorry, that's not what I said. I didn't say you don't have a right to associate with Zanu PF. I asked why you are attracted to Zanu PF. That's not equivalent to saying you can't support Zanu PF.
I did not say to you. I want you to listen to my answer one more time. Do not put my mouth. I did not say what you did not say. I said to your question. I do not even reference you at any point. Listen, right? So we have a discussion. Are you listening?
No. Sorry, you said we deny you your right to support party. No, my question never implied that.
This is what I'm saying. You're not listening. You're hearing what you want.
No, I heard what you said. So I'm not gonna let that fly. Sorry. I just continue with your answer anyway. We're getting sidetracked. Just answer.
That was my point. It was not something you said. I did not say that.
Okay.
It was my point. I said to your question, right? I said this presents us an opportunity for us to address the fundamental issue of polarization, political polarization.
Okay.
Because what's underpinning that line of questioning is intolerance, right? The inability to accept one's right to associate. Now, let's pretend that the argument is true, that which is false. It's a faulty argument, and I would dare anyone to show me the statistics that they're referencing. It's absolute nonsense. So I want to address that. That's a walk in the park. Zanu PF has a huge presence in the youth. I currently am chairman of the Youth League within the UK, and we have huge numbers. Now, they may not meet your own equivalation of what you deem to be a good number, but we do have a youth presence. Now that's obvious. So I'm not going to address that.
So you haven't answered my question yet. You are just dodging and.
I'm answering now. I don't answer. Listen, Lance. I will not answer a question on the basis that you want me to.
No, but you can't take 10 minutes. You can't take 10 minutes. It becomes boring if you take too long. Why are you attracted to Zanu PF? In 15 seconds, you can give an answer.
Well, you don't. It's up to you. But I'm answering.
Is he finished?
I have a right to associate. And my right to associate as a young person pits me directly under the ideology and philosophy and the value system of Zanu PF. And that's why I support it. I support its Pan-Africanist agenda. I support its land reform program, and I support its...
That's more like it. That's the answer we are asking. You didn't have to say you have a right to support Zanu PF because no one took that away from you, Farai. I mean, you know me better than that.
You're fighting shadows here. You're fighting...
No. In your answer, you started your answer by saying I have a right to support Zanu PF, and which made me wonder, are you saying I'm taking that right away from you? I just asked for you to explain to people.
You listened to the statement in isolation. So you started fighting yourself, not me.
Okay, let's take this to Chenayi. So he's drawn to the land reform agenda. He's drawn to Pan-Africanism. He stated a host of other objectives. I still want to throw this also to you, Chenayi, representing the MDC, because I see debates on Twitter. The MDC is not innocent either when it comes to vile language on social media platforms. Do you share culpability for this also?
So as I've explained earlier, Lance, we have two sides to this coin.
Mm-hmm.
And what we have are individual young people that are frustrated. They're fed up with the system as it is currently run and presented, and the lack of opportunities,
Mm-hmm.
the increased corruption, the increased brutality on them from Zanu PF.
Mm-hmm.
And that takes it to an individual level where individuals are venting out their frustration. And we're grateful for a social media presence because actually it's a safe space. Most of those people would say what they say on, they would vent and say to.
So are you saying because it's a form of venting, it's acceptable?
It's an airing of frustration,
Mm-hmm.
and it's substantiated frustration, right? I would say, and in some ways, actually, when you listen to Farai intently, he's actually just as frustrated. He has mentioned the brutality by the police force. He stick to one example, fair enough. He himself mentioned the fact he is aware that not everybody will agree or uphold the ideologies of Zanu PF. Yes, he also accepts and is aware of the conditions of the sanctions that have been leveled against Zimbabwe. He's aware of them, and they're not things that can't be done. They can be fixed. And you also highlighted in your own words, not to quote verbatim because I can't remember, because you do go around, long winding sentences.
Mm-hmm.
But you did say that you were not also best pleased by the way things have been run in part by Zanu PF.
Okay, sorry, Chenayi. Sorry, before Farai you answer. Sorry, Chenayi. Maybe I missed it. You really didn't answer my question. Yeah.
No, I did take a leaf out of my learned colleague's book. Yeah.
No. Sorry.
If
Okay.
Allow me the indulgence.
The MDC is sorry, Chenayi. Hold on.
Why I, as an individual, support the MDC Alliance is currently run by Nelson Chamisa as the president. In case of some confusion, is that the MDC represents the people. They represent my frustrations. They understand that this country for decades has been shoved down the rubbish pile by Zanu PF. And they have stood up to say, together with the people, let's change this. Let's include democracy on our agenda, because there's no democracy with Zanu PF.
Let me throw this to the floor.
Access to opportunities for young people, because this is not happening in Zimbabwe currently. They have said, let's respect the human rights. Let's look at what we can do better as a nation. And they've been able to share that. And I am 1000% behind that agenda. And I will say that boldly. I will not hide, like my learned colleague has tried to do, behind long sentences and dodging questions. I will stand proud to say I am a supporter of the MDC Alliance as it stands today. For those reasons.
Let me throw the questions and allow people to ask questions. Okay, guys? So I'm going to be displaying my questions. They're not coming from me, Farai, so don't be apprehensive.
Please answer them as well.
Okay, so here's the question. So this one is for Farai, okay? This is, I'm displaying it on the screen there. So this is Fred Zururwa. Farai, can you catch the next flight to Zimbabwe and find a job and get paid in bond notes? We'll be glad to hear how far you can make noise about this Zanu PF system that has reduced us to nothing. Question for you, Farai.
I think that's a comment. It isn't a question. Where's the question?
Oh, I'll know about question, Ipapo.
Or can I catch a flight?
Okay, let me show it again. Farai, can you catch the next flight to Zimbabwe and find a job and get paid in bond notes? We'll be glad to hear how far you can make noise about this Zanu PF system that has reduced us to nothing. So it's kind of a
question with presuppositions and so forth. He doesn't know me, first of all, but I will respect him as a listener and a viewer of your esteemed Neander TV station, and I will answer the question and say that yes, I am one of many that hope. I would like to fly home, and I would fly home to find a job. But I will also not be impractical and be disingenuous with you and say to you that those opportunities are flying, everywhere. We have, remember, my support of Zanu PF is not detached from the realities, as Zanu PF equally accepts that there are challenges in our country, and we're fighting those challenges on a day-to-day basis. Now, I, like you, would like to get to a point where I can fly out and get a job and be paid in those same bone nuts and work towards building our country. But we are all realistic here. But given the opportunity, I would definitely fly back home. But I also want to be honest with you, that because remember the theme here is polarization. And
I think the answer is no, Lance.
Okay, Chenayi, there's a question for you. Sorry.
That's a nice one. That's a
nice one, Chenayi. Okay, this is a question from Mark Shumba. Sorry, let me display it again. This is a question for Chenayi. This is Mark Shumba. Farai is articulating a critical issue of political polarization, which is the reason why Zimbabwe is currently torn apart. MDC is very intolerant, yet they preach democracy. Chenayi.
Okay, so
nice one.
In the first instance, when they say that MDC is very intolerant, they haven't specified what MDC is intolerant of. Now, I can help them there. MDC, indeed, like me, like many individuals in Zimbabwe, is intolerant of a government that is highly corrupt, that continues to misspend, continues to issue out contracts that continue to steal from the taxpayers, a government that is not willing to put behind bars individuals that have been named and shamed as being highly corrupt. We do not tolerate that. We are very intolerant of that. If that is what, and I will take liberty in assuming that that is what your viewer means.
I think
now, when we are talking of polarization of thought, of course, I will never align my thinking to the thinking of Zanu PF, no matter how well they try to sugarcoat it under the badge of Pan-Africanism, okay? Pan-Africanism is about creating an environment where all Africans thrive, an environment where actually, Farai, you are willing to get onto the next flight home if you needed to. If
you can't be accommodated.
Working in recruitment, if you got to an opportunity where somebody said, Farai, we actually really need your skills in Zimbabwe, you would get onto the next flight and go to Zimbabwe and
no
work.
Problem,
okay, I have a quick question. Sorry.
When you're taking opportunities away, it isn't land reform. That reformation of land is only to benefit the very, very few. It isn't land reform. Yeah. So I will openly admit to being very intolerant and will never align my thinking, my desires as a patriotic Zimbabwean to those that want to continue.
Okay, sorry, hold on.
Listener, you are intolerant.
Sorry, hold on. Hold on. There's another question for Chenayi. Sorry, there's another question for Chenayi. So I'm displaying it on the screen there.
I can't see it.
Okay, yeah, I'll read it out. Clive Takawira. The MDC talk about corruption, yet they represent the corrupt people in the private sector and politics. Do you guys have principles? That's for you, Chenayi.
Okay. So I will give my personal views on that and agree that personally, if I was a lawyer, if I was a barrister, I would never represent someone being accused of corruption. Now, these are activities that are happening in people's capacities as individuals, right? And it would be very unfair for me to answer on their behalf. I believe that that is a valid question and that we should continue to pose it to anybody that does undertake those activities, and they should be able to answer.
Next question for Farai. There we go. So this is from Bukosi. I'm displaying it. Farai, are you really impressed by the level of political will by our government in dealing with corruption, black market, and tribalism?
I think naturally, I wouldn't say really impressed. I think it'll be false for anyone who's a political player to say that they're overly impressed by any of the. Even if you ask anyone in the Conservative Party, who's really a political player, I think the party can do better, and the party aspires to do better. That satisfies me.
Okay. The second part is for Chenayi. Let me display it again just so that people can see it. It's coming up. And Chenayi, what's there in MDC name which differentiates it from Zanu PF? Comment on tribalism, toxicity in politics. Why does your party label everyone who diverges opinion, e.g. Tisikala, Welshman, and now Komich? So use my labels, Chenayi. Anyone who doesn't agree with your party leader is working with Zanu PF. I think that's what they are trying to say.
Anyone that doesn't agree with Zanu PF, can you repeat?
And why does your party label everyone who has a divergent opinion? So it happened to BT, happened to Sikala, happened to Welshman. When there are disagreements, they are branded Zanu PF.
Okay, so it's a bit of a broad brush statement, so I will try to answer it as best as I can, because and it also requires context. So I will bring into context the idea of Thokozani Kube and Douglas Monzora, etc. Now, we are focused on a specific agenda. This agenda is to bring some sort of sanity to our existence as a country, to bring some sort of economic well-being to our existence as a country. Now, when we have individuals that will choose to put themselves ahead of that common agenda, it would be right to make an assumption that in their divergence of what is for the common good is actually a support of what isn't. And a support of what isn't is a support of Zanu PF, right? So if I say to you, there's two options. We're either going to town or we are going to the village. And you say, I want to go to the village. So therefore, that means you're not going to town. So if we say we're moving together towards a common objective of the liberation of Zimbabwe, the re-liberation of Zimbabwe, rather, I should say, the re-engagement of economic well-being, and you say, I'm coming off this bus and I'm going in the other direction. Well, that other direction, it leads to further poverty and an extension of the Zanu PF rule. So it is that association that may result in people labeling individuals that go against as being Zanu PF. It is a very high-level statement, but beneath that, what that means is you've gone against the agenda of the people's movement, and you've put yourself ahead of it, but in so doing, you have extended the Zanu PF misrule, as it were.
Okay, Farai, my question here comes in the form of a picture. There's a picture that I'm gonna display. I don't think you guys will be able to see it, but our viewers will see. So I'm displaying a picture there of Joanna Mamombe, Cecilia Chembiri, and Netai Marova. I'll throw this one at you, Farai. So the police initially, they had them in custody, and then we had a U-turn, and then we had accusations that the abductions were staged. As a young Zanu PF representative, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, my thoughts are that we will await a full investigation, and from that investigation, have a more informed position. Of course, we have our suspicions, considering that this thing has happened before. But our position is going to be informed by an investigation. So we're in support of the government's position.
Mm-hmm. Is it not a worry though that this has happened a lot? We don't know where Itai Zamara is right now, and there's quite a long, detailed history of abductions.
I'm a young father. I'm a big supporter of the gold child. I'd like to think that I aspire to do as much as I can if ever I have the power to support the gold child in as many ways that we can. And I think that the party that I support espouses that very same value system. Now, what I'm saying is that in as much as I'm concerned, but my concern is not informed. It's not informed by investigation and substantive facts. And what I'm saying is that the outcome of that investigation will inform our disposition. But as like any other party, we condemn abductions, but we don't take responsibility for something we haven't done. So we'll await for the investigation.
Okay. Now, do you feel, Farai, your government is in charge? I mean, might sound like a loaded question, but I ask this because every time we have these abductions, the go-to answer is that there's a third force. How do we have a third force when Emmerson Mnangagwa is the president? How do we have a third force operating in our country? Is not the president in charge?
Well, the third force, if you look at the term itself, is a very historical term. These things happen in young states that are emerging, where states that are more resourced than them would, come on, history is littered with examples of third forces. I mean, Libya itself had.
40 years is not a young state, though.
No, come on, listen. You don't 40 years in isolation. You speak 40 years in the context of the world global growth. America is over 250 years old. Britain is over 2,000 years old. I'm saying by comparison. That's why we say we're a young democracy. America, till this very day, calls itself a young democracy. So if America, over 250 years, calls itself a young democracy, 40 years in the context of a nation. So try to put the way I frame my answers in the context of what I'm saying. So I'm simply saying that, yes, we have had many challenges, but we have yet a lot to learn. But to simply say that, to say Kuti, and rubbish it and generalize it as such, I don't think that works. Things do not act in isolation. Let's look at it from a case-by-case basis. And
so August shooting, protesters, third force, abduction, third force. So really,
what's there to say? There was a August shooting. What's more there to say? Apart from the fact that there was a commission, the commission had its outcomes, and you're more than free to read those outcomes. But yet again, it's not that,
give over, Farai.
Not that we're
give over. Come on.
Support of the killing of anyone in Zimbabwe. What I'm saying is, statecraft you have to look at it within context. So to just load these questions on the basis of generalizing questions because it supports a protagonist approach to Zanu PF is not helpful to the argument of Paula.
You know why I asked you this question? We're discussing polarization in Zim politics, and I feel it's important to get an answer from a ruling party representative. Kuti, all these things, you are the guys Varutonga. You are the ones who are in charge. It is the reason why Mnangagwa sought office, Anditika, is to make sure we have a country that everyone can be proud of. So when things don't go right, it is only right that the buck stops with the person are president. If you let me ask the question. So if we have someone are in charge and they keep failing, and because we have all these problems, would you agree with we have a lot of problems and we don't seem to have any solutions inside?
Let me ask you a question. Let me answer your question by asking you a question. Do you think Obama is a good president or not?
What's that?
Do you think Obama was a good president in America?
I don't know why we're talking about America. I mean, I'm really disinterested. Whenever we have these international comparisons, I feel like yawning because it just feels like a way of escaping from context here.
No, because
sorry, let Farai answer.
I'm not saying anything.
Yeah,
because I expect you when you have the floor.
Answer.
Okay, so when I say that, yet however people would like to define him, a majority of people tend to say, well, in terms of my public spaces, tend to say that he was a good president, and I'm inclined to agree based on his many policies that were quite successful. But equally, he stood under multiple deaths of black folk, that we still see today, a country that has gone through so much transitions and has gone through civil movement. But I make that point. Why am I making this point? I make this point to demonstrate that in the development stages of every country, we are going to face particular challenges. You then do not argue the fact that, well, because the head of state is the head of state, these issues should not occur. The reason why he's the head of state at the stage that he's at is to get us to another level. Look at the themes that we've followed through. Look at the things that we've tried to do to mitigate that. And in particular, this particular issue, Yachimombe, the ladies in question, this one is Mamombe is taken very seriously by the state. In fact, but the problem is this: when the state takes it seriously, and you do not want to engage the state, the question then becomes,
okay.
But is it not problematic when lies are being told? One moment, Nyati, the spokesperson, ano confirm out vanhu vasungwa, and then following day vakuramba kuti they had them in custody. Do you build confidence?
Lance, let's pretend that I agree with you. But if you are if you belong to the opposition party, right? These very same institutions, you hope to one day govern them so that they can do better. So, as an opposition party leader, and I'm sure she's a senior leader at that, you engage the very states the very institutions that you hope to one day lead, because that same institution, they do report issues, isn't it? So I'm simply saying that she engage the police through the process of investigation, so that so that you then do not have problems.
All right. As you are talking, there's someone. There's a question flashing there. Vengesai V Muyambo. Rwanda is an infant, Iwe, but they are doing a tremendous job. Quickly answer that one, Farai, in 10 seconds. Wangochi did 40, very young.
Yeah, well, yes, but we have a better Gini coefficient compared to Rwanda. Our GDP is bigger than Rwanda. Our infrastructure is stated to be better than Rwanda. So it's a bad comparison. Rwanda is too small.
That's fallacious.
You can actually you can Google that, Chenayi. You have a computer in front of you. Look at the GDP.
Let's throw it to you, Chenayi. You want to respond to that? Chenayi, let Chenayi answer, Farai.
What am I answering? The first question around...
What is very fallacious? Just explain.
So it's very fallacious, because when you look at economics, and I speak in context, and because I have done development economics. When you look at economics, data, the devil is always in the detail. So you're looking at a Gini coefficient, right? That is premised on things like income, and you're saying, well, the Gini coefficient is better in Zimbabwe than it is in Rwanda. However, there are other measures of poverty where we would not stick up. And those are the important factors, because if you walk into...
Farai, let Chenayi explain.
You go to Chipinge and you say to the guys in Chipinge, right, guys, your Gini coefficient in Zimbabwe is much better than in Rwanda. It means absolutely nothing to them. What is important to them is, are they able to afford a basket of basic goods? How much is that?
Okay, we seem to have Chenayi. Okay, Chenayi, your screen is frozen. I think Farai.
Yeah.
Okay,
what Chenayi was is a point that I do agree with, which is a majoritarian approach to looking at politics, which I would argue that MDC does quite well. When you go to Chipinge, as she said, at Chipinge they will say go to Tineland, and we're able to farm for ourselves, we're able to be self-reliant. But in terms of and I wish she could come back to the platform so we can discuss this.
Okay, sorry. Let me try and make this.
I'm back. Sorry about that, guys.
Yeah, that's okay.
I'm here.
Okay. We need to I don't want to do those 2-hour programs, so we need to finalize in 10 minutes. Okay, guys. So here's a good question. I think this one can be something that we can where is that one end up with it? It's a good question for us to... Okay, here we go. This is from Mark Shumba. Okay, Mark Shumba says, Chenayi and Farai, as young people, how do we find each other to create a better Zimbabwe, tolerant of divergent views and free from polarization? So, Farai.
Can I go first? Because Farai never finishes.
No, Chenayi. Let Farai.
Okay, I'll keep it short. I think it's doing things like this, having platforms to discuss and engage and have an exchange of ideas until we find each other. So I think this is a good start, and we'll need to cultivate such a culture abroad the political landscape.
Okay. Chenayi, over to you.
Okay, so my point would be, so when Farai was talking, I think it was maybe 2 questions back, and he actually said, look, I'm a dad. I'm a young guy, I'm a dad, and I promote the girl child, right? When we get to a point where we actually can see the human side and we can talk as people, not political rhetoric, not to go on about, things really that don't make sense to the, to Joe Blogs on the street. When you come to me with things like the Gini coefficient and this, that, and the other, we can never speak properly. We need to talk properly. I need to be able to look you in the eye, Farai, and say, look, we had a situation where 3 young women were arrested at a central police station, went missing, and came back heavily brutalized. And those same 3 women are now being forced to wear prison regalia, forced to appear in a court whilst they're still on their hospital bed. And I can look you in the eye and ask and say to you, Farai, is that right? And you can say to me tonight, you know what? I'm answering you as a human being. That is not right. And when we find each other like that, that is the only moment that we can say, right, how do we resolve this? How do we work together to make sure that our nation, our children, our women, our men are not subjected to such treatment?
Okay, Farai.
That is when we can find each other.
There's a question from Kudam Sasiwa for you, Farai. Let me show it on the screen. This is Mr. Fresh in a Box, is it? Yeah, and Kuda. Does Farai not feel shame for citing that sham of inquiry? I think he's talking about the August one. This is from Kudam Sasiwa for you, Farai. Anzi, does Farai not feel shame for citing that sham of an inquiry?
Well, that's a quick one. I don't feel shame for citing something that was independent. No, I don't.
Okay, you want to add to that why because you're just giving a statement. You are not justifying.
No, it was an independent inquiry. It came up with its outcomes, and those outcomes I stand by. So and that's neither here nor there. Whether I support or I don't support, or whether he supports or he doesn't support, it was an independent inquiry. It came up with its resolutions, and that's what I cited.
I'm picking up is an uncomfortable subject for you. You tend to give very long answers to some questions. On this one, you're not taking more than 5 seconds to answer it. It's like you are being dismissive in the way you're answering it.
Wow, from a journalist to a behavioral psychologist. That's quite impressive.
No. I'm just
being a person.
I'm just observing what I think is a difference in a. Sorry, Farai. Let's not talk over each other. I'm just generally you take longer to answer my questions, and then.
But if you look at.
Let me make my point.
Look at the last 2 questions I answered. After Chenayi said I take long, I've kept my answers short. That answers that.
No, anyway, but I'm saying generally when you have a topic you're not comfortable with, your answer is very short. Saga, it's not.
Firstly, you're not a behavioral scientist, so don't try to diagnose me. You're drawing a straw man here. A specific question, and I answered it specifically. It was a very short and precise question, and the answer was short and precise.
All right. Well, Kuda is not happy with your answer. I've displayed Kuda's Farai. Wapi was 0 out of the easy. He's not happy, man. I told you your answer was dismissive.
I did get fresh in the box. So
okay. On the root display, Kuda 45 degrees there. And 45 degrees. I think you know what he's talking about. There was a lot of. Okay, let's be serious because people died, and there was no. Let me make my point. Sorry, people died, and we're discussing polarization here, and we have a country where you're not allowed to demonstrate. So I think I'm probably answering some of the questions I asked Kuti when you deny people even simple things like demonstrating, it's no wonder I think they lash out. Is that a fair point, Farai?
Listen, Lance, let me try to put it this way. He asked about why I cited the commission. The commission was an independent commission, was it not? And it came out with its outcomes. Now, we need to make a separation between what was discussed within the commission and the recommendations made in the commission. I cited the recommendations made in the commission. I don't want to go and dig up what was discussed. The commission happened. They have their recommendations. Damn them, well and good. I stand by the outcomes that they presented.
Okay, Farai, Anzina Silvanos Banditi Mudzo, I think you know him, is an arts activist. Manzi, how do we find each other when the military is heavily involved in politics? The only way we can move is to demilitarize everything in Zimbabwe. Do you agree, Farai, that the military need to be chucked out of our politics? They're too involved.
Well, listen. Firstly, we have a civil president, a civilian for a president
who came via a coup.
Listen, Lance. This is your narrative, and I don't want.
No. It's not my narrative. We had a coup come now 2017. Come on, comrade.
Lance. In order,
is it my narrative? There was a coup in 2017.
It is indeed, because in order for a coup to exist, the constitution has to be suspended. The constitution was never suspended. Parliament actually happened against the backdrop of military presence on the roads. The constitution at no point was suspended. That's what defines a coup, if you did not know. By procedure,
we had soldiers at ZBC. That's a coup, my friend. I mean, when the army takes over. Sorry, when an army takes over. When an army takes over state institutions, that's a coup.
Because you have soldiers, for Christ's sake.
Sorry. When Sibusiso Moyo went on ZBC to say the president is safe,
let me. I'm going to speak slowly, so you have, because I don't want to be caught up in my topics of power. One a question, and I'm answering. In order for a coup to exist, the constitution has to be suspended. At no point was our constitution suspended. In fact, the way that our president was eventually, a former president, President Mugabe, was eventually ousted, was he resigned. And it was through, and don't listen to me, listen to Nelson Chamisa, who called it not a coup, a lawyer at that. If you don't believe me, listen to Nelson Chamisa. Let me answer the question at hand. The question at hand is that...
but Chamisa is not the be-all and end-all. We saw soldiers on the streets. We saw...
I'm sure he is the be-all.
Sorry, allow me to interchange. We saw an army general on ZBC. We saw soldiers ZBC. There were soldiers on the streets. It was a coup. Come on. I mean...
You are in media. You know...
Yeah, I know. But coup yanga iripo comrade. Obvious.
Do you want to join the debate or you want to chair it?
No, my friend. Sorry. I checked. You were answering Anditika, and then you were. The question is. Sorry, Farai. Hold on. To clarity. The problem is the military are too involved in Zim politics. Don't from Silvanos. So wangwakupa minduro to that question kuti army involvement. So I then just slightly interjected kuti Mnangagwa came via a coup in 2017. So go ahead uchipindura.
So I differ. He did not come via a coup.
Okay, he came via military assistance.
Yeah.
For want of a technical term. He came via military assistance.
But I will lean towards what Nelson Chamisa himself said. He said it was not a coup, therefore it was not a coup. That's who I'll lean with.
It was a military assistant takeover.
Let me finish. In fact, Chamisa praised that process, if anything. But I don't know.
I did too, actually, at the time.
Anyway, but let me answer the question. In terms of involvement of people that have retired from the military, this is not new. The United States has a number of people that were former military colonels and people that were former military officers or services officers. In fact, Congress is filled with former military people. So it's not that the military itself is involved, but people who once served are now
working on behalf of them. The military itself is involved. That's a different example. Because in Zimbabwe, the military itself is involved.
Chenayi.
But I think is the military a problem in Zim politics? They are too involved.
No,
you are running away from that.
No, the military is not a problem in Zim politics. They are not involved in Zim politics. They deal with the barracks. That's what they deal with. They deal with national security issues as it relates to military national security concerns. And that's what they deal with.
Okay.
So why do we see them on the street? Why were they on the street on the 1st of August?
Well, they were on the streets, as they explained, because they felt that the internal political altitude of the country was now untenable. And they felt that it would lead to a national security issue, which is in their purview. And as a consequence, it was a politically led process under the auspice of the military. And that's why even Nelson Chamisa himself says it is not a coup.
Okay, sorry, Farai. I referred to...
So dictionary and Nelson Chamisa, what anything Nelson Chamisa says is used by your argument. Yeah, it becomes part of your arguing. How do you define? So sorry, this is interesting. No. I'm not letting this one slide. Define a military coup, Farai. What's a military coup?
As I said, the suspension of a constitution.
That's just your definition of a military coup.
Yeah, the suspension.
So soldiers showing up at a state broadcaster, taking over and making an announcement is not a military coup.
Yes, it makes the appearance of a military coup. That's why even in
Chiwenga showing up at State House.
Let me finish. Let me finish. It shows the appearance. That's why when SB Moyo addressed the public, his first statement was that this is not a coup. To give perfect clarity to what they are. And
Sarah, Constitution inongo suspend when the army have been deployed.
The Constitution was not suspended at any point.
So Constitution, so why do we need the army at ZBC? ZBC.
Listen, because the army wanted to ensure that the decimation of information in terms of its
comrade
would be controlled. Listen, whether you
do you believe this, Farai? Do you believe this stuff? Do you believe what they're saying?
This is hilarious. I can agree with you,
but what you're saying.
Lance, I want you to understand something so we can have a discussion. I'm not here to try to help you understand something. We are here to differ. It's fine. I'm telling you my point of view. You respect it, you discard it, well and good.
No, but the point of departure is denying obvious things, which is the problem. Denying obvious things. When you have an army general state broadcaster, come on. I think if I'm to throw in my 2 cents, Farai, if I'm to throw in my 2 cents, I always say this to you, but I think maybe the problem with Zanu PF, muri wired to deny everything. Like, there are some things where you shouldn't deny, and when you deny even obvious things, you don't look credible. Like, you can admit some things with, okay, we had a problem with Mugabe, we needed assistance from the army to dislodge Mdara, you earn more respect for telling the truth.
Lance, let's firstly, I don't need to be told how one gains credibility, especially from your establishment, especially from you, considering your history and what you have done to the country in the past.
What I've done to the country, humble me.
Let me.
Well, what am I capable of doing? I'm not even in charge.
No. Let me speak on that.
What do I?
No. Let me correct you on something. We want a particular platform in here, and we are engaging. Ndakudza kuti wandibvunza kuti what defines a coup, and they used you used the symbolism aspect. Symbolism. Ekuti kune masoja pa.
It's not symbolism. If masoja take over a state broadcaster, how is that symbolism? Like, how is that symbolism though?
You cite the aspect, the presence of masoja, so forth. They map out how they're going to deal with this affair, right? Parliament is still operational. If it was a coup, Parliament would not be able to operate. We then find the MDC and Zanu PF jointly, right, working together in Parliament. both accepting that the issue had become untenable, and in order to avert a further security risk, the army intervened.
Okay, question from Kudam Sasiwa. Anzina Kudam Sasiwa, was my detention constitutional on the night of the coup? This is from Kudam Sasiwa.
Well, I cannot speak to his detention because I'm not aware of his case. You'll have to speak to a lawyer who would be briefed with that case. I'm not aware of that, and I cannot comment on that.
All right, let's bring in Chenayi. Farai points out to the support that the MDC lent to the military coup. So are you guys hypocrites in this situation, Chenayi?
So it was not so much that we were, shall I say, hoodwinked? Is that a word?
Hoodwinked.
So an opportunity.
A bunch of lawyers.
An opportunity.
No. So
presented itself. An opportunity presented itself. Yes. Looking like Zanu PF had finally come round to a reformist agenda.
Okay.
They finally realized their own flaws and were now looking to reform, right? They took advantage of the mood, the prevailing mood of the people at the time. They capitalized on that to sell a fraud, really. And they used the citizens of Zimbabwe, including those that supported MDC, to fulfill their very selfish gain. So it was it was quite well done, I must say, because if I look back at the time, even I myself was excited. We thought finally the Zimbabwe that we've all been waiting for, Zanu PF has reformed. We're looking forward to a democratic future in Zimbabwe, because that is what we do as human beings. Initially, we're not thinking, okay, this is Zanu PF. They want to help us with this problem. Perhaps, they're not being truthful. Perhaps, it's a matter of fraud or whatever it is that they're presenting to us. And this is what happened, if we're being honest, right? It did not take long until Zanu PF were there to show their true colors, and the mantras of Zimbabwe is open for business, etc., etc.
Okay. So we've done 1 hour, 32 minutes. Is a bit too long, guys. I'll ask each of you one question to finalize. Anditika, Farai, Silva military, and allow me to properly explain what I'm trying to ask you. In terms of who we find each other, Anditi, how do we find each other when there is no truth telling? Because my observation from this discussion, if we can't even agree, Kuti Masoja went on the streets, took over state broadcaster, there were soldiers on the streets, Chiwenga went to State House, informed Mugabe Kuti he was no longer in charge. If we can't even agree with it, that's a coup. How do we find? I mean, I think there are some things that is so obvious. Kuti tikatoratidza kuti hatina agreement on obvious things. Finding each other, is it not a problem for us?
Well, first, let's define what intolerance is to begin with. Finding each other is not, because truth is never absolute. Purely because you think something is obvious and you think something is truthful does not make it truthful. There are nuances, there are contexts to every issue.
Okay.
Life is not black and white; it's beige. So what intolerance does is it denies us having the accommodative aspect to have a conversation, right? So tolerance now allows me to say, well, listen, I don't think it was a coup because this is how I see it and this is what happened. You can then have your position, and then we are able to to not agree, but remain agreeable. And that is what's crystal. Allowing someone to have the floor to express their opinion, and differ with it, but remaining agreeable. I know that I can never change Chenayi to align to the aspirations and the value systems that I espouse as someone who belongs to Zanu PF, as she could never convince me to ever join the MDC. But what we will try to do, and I think what we were trying to do in this discussion, is to disagree but remain agreeable. Tolerance is not about alignment. So truth telling, the truth is, it's a murky subject. I mean, even science, it's a very murky subject. It's not absolute. So what we should do is begin to accept that we have divergent views, and we look at.
But is your party not too wired to deny everything? Is it not a problem that you want to deny everything? it's very rare that Zanu PF accepts anything.
I honestly hope that is not the case. But if it is a perceptive issue, then it's something that we have to take on board and work towards reshaping. Okay.
Chenayi.
That's not.
Okay. So you happy you've had your piece? Ndipe Chenayi closing remarks, or is there something you want to add?
Sorry, but before I go, I just want to say thank you for the opportunity, and thank you to your viewers and the line of question that we received.
Chenayi, I wasn't satisfied with your response to the issue toxic politics, because Twitter is quite a platform where we see a lot of name calling, particularly for people who don't agree with the MDC. Saga, can I don't know if I can hazard to add an extra question on that to re-explain it. I didn't quite get it. Are you saying what you go through justifies the end?
Okay, so I want to. You see, MDC is a people's movement. Yes. And from that premise, you've got people that are very much frustrated with Zanu PF, literally going to bed hungry, literally watching your loved one die, not because unnecessarily so, literally going through each day, not knowing when you're going to break out of the cycle of poverty, not having a way to access that. And that is heartbreaking, and it's also very frustrating. And I think it is a culmination of all these frustrations that people are venting and speaking out against Zanu PF.
Okay, where is Farai? Farai, are you still there?
No, it said he left.
Oh, he left. Okay. All right. Okay, continue, Zago.
No, so what I was saying is, Lance, when you're frustrated, you've got to be able to speak out your frustrations, right? We have very little opportunity in Zimbabwe for people to rightfully express themselves, to rightfully actually do something about their own situation. Now, when you're presented with somebody who's actually responsible for taking away those freedoms, responsible for allowing you to watch your child, your mother, your brother die from an unnecessary death, you've got to be able to say to somebody, look, I'm fed up. I've had enough. What the hell? Why are you doing this? Why are you stealing from me? Why are you taking this away from me? Now, the language that might present itself in can be colorful sometimes, but these are individuals that have gone through possibly a lifetime of these frustrations. So you've got to give them some grace. You've got to be able to understand that what has happened to this person for them to feel this much negative energy towards Zanu PF.
Okay, just double checking if Farai is still there. Okay, I am assuming he's gone. Anyway, Farai, if you're watching, hey, thank you so much, guys. Chenayi, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, Lance.
And Farai, it was good to continue our usual arguments. I really appreciate your time, my brother. And so tomorrow we have an interview with the new MDC spokesperson. That's Farai Muvuti. That's at 4 p.m. Zimbabwean time. That's 5 p.m. UK time. So we'll be getting the response of the MDC Alliance to the court ruling here Friday, and other questions that we're gonna throw away. So that's 4 p.m. Zimbabwean time. Farai Muvuti on Neanda TV. So Chenayi, thanks a lot.
Thanks, Lance.
Anditika, Edibo,
Yes.
thanks.
See ya.